Hello and welcome. My name's Angela Davis and I'm the Forum Quilter. And today we're going to be doing a block called Monkey Wrench. Can you see it? And this is a wonderful block for learning basic quilting skills and sewing skills. It teaches you how to cut accurately squares, rectangles, and then the measurements for squares to create 4 half-square triangles. Let me show it to you again. In this one, I just grabbed fabric out of my scrap bin to create this block. And then the block that I'm going to be demonstrating, I also grabbed that fabric out of my scrap bin. So let's get started. Okay. So today we're going to talk about the monkey wrench block, and the monkey wrench block has been around for a very long time. And if you enjoy looking at quilt books and quilt magazines and vintage books, you will see this pattern come up a lot. The square that we're going to be making today finishes at 12 inches, okay? So what does that mean? You're a beginner quilter and you don't know what that means. What does finish size mean? What does cut size mean? You want to learn how to make a quilt, but you've never made one before. Or maybe you made one, but you didn't have a lot of guidance. You were sort of on your own, trying to watch videos and trying to read books and magazines on it, but you really had no guided instruction, okay? When we cut a square, okay, so let's say I'm cutting the square for this center piece right here, okay? I want this to finish at 2 inches. That means it's going to finish at 2 inches on all 4 sides, okay? Now, if I were to sew a 2-inch square to a 2-inch square, I have what's called seam allowance. Okay. The seam allowance. The seam allowance is the distance between where I cut my fabric and where I stitch my 2 pieces together. Where I stitch the 2 pieces together is called the seam. And this space right here between where I cut the square and where I sew it, that's called seam allowance, okay? In quilting, we typically use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, okay? What does that seam allowance do? Well, if I were to sew these 2 squares together, okay, and I sewed right up against near the edge, they would eventually come apart. Okay, because there's no fabric, because there's not enough fabric between the edge where I cut and the stitching line, okay? This would end up fraying and the 2 blocks would end up coming apart. That's what seam allowance is for. Seam allowance is so that as you're using the quilt, it doesn't come apart at the seams. So, if this is going to finish at 12 inches, this square, okay, that means this square right here, okay, is going to finish at 5. This square is going to finish at 5, and this section right here is going to finish at 2 inches. That gives me 12 inches across by 12 inches down once this block is sewn into the quilt, okay? So my seam allowance is going to be a 1/4 inch. So I have a 1/4 inch on this side, this side, this side, and this side. So here's my 2 inches cut block plus a 1/4 inch on this side and a 1/4 inch on this side and a 1/4 inch on this side and a 1/4 inch on this side. So I'm cutting this square at 2.5 inches because a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch is a 1/2 inch, okay? So I want to finish 2.5 inch, I want to finish 2-inch square in the middle, so I'm cutting it at 2.5. These blue squares are also finished at 2 inches, so I know that on this piece that I'm making, these have to be cut at 2.5. okay? The yellow on the outside is 2 inches by 3 inches. That's what it's going to finish at. So I'm cutting my rectangles for the piece I'm going to show you. I'm cutting it 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches, okay? A 1/4 inch seam allowance. Oh boy, is it warm in here. Here in Ohio, it has been in the 90s, and we have high humidity in Ohio. So today it is around the low 80s, which is considerably cooler, but it's still warm. So I purposely don't have my window air conditioner on so that you can hear me, okay? Now, I'm gonna leave in the description box below what you're going to need to create one of these blocks, okay? Now, this square right here, in quilt making, we call this a half square triangle because it finishes at a square, but the triangle splits it right in half along the diagonal. That's called a half square triangle. Now, I'm going to show you how we put that together, okay? So I'm going to pan the camera down. Now, here's my layout. Here's my center. Okay. I have 4 squares in the pink, Dusty Rose. I have 1 yellow square in the middle and then 4 rectangles. See? Just like that. Now I'm going to show you how to do these half square triangles. Now, I need the half square triangle to finish at 5 inches, okay? So, I need 2 squares cut right here. I need 2 squares cut, okay, get ready, at 6 inches. So instead of adding a 1/2 inch to my 5 inches finished, because a 1/2 inch includes two 1/4 inch seams on both sides, I'm adding 1 inch to that measurement. So just remember, half square triangles, you always add 1 inch, okay, to your finished measurement. So I need a 5 inch finished square. I'm adding 1 inch. So I'm going to put them right sides facing, right like that. And I'm going to draw a line right down the center, okay? Let me pin it. Right sides facing, draw a line right down the center, down the diagonal. Now, one of these squares makes 2 half square triangles. Here's my other one, because I need 4 of them. I need 4 finished in the block, so I'm going to sew 2 of these. Okay, now what we're going to do is, oops, I lost my square there. Oops, lost my square. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch on this side of the line and on this side of the line. And I'm going to do the same thing on this one. I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch on this side of the line and this side of the line, okay? So here we go. Okay, so I have take your pins up before you get to your needle so that you don't accidentally break your needle. Okay, so I did that line, and here I did that stitching line, and here's my sewing line. So I'm switching to this side, and I'm not cutting my string. I'm keeping that there, okay? That just makes it easier, and it saves on thread. Now I'm gonna cut here. Okay, I'm gonna press. Just gonna give it a quick press. Quick. And now, right where that line is, where I drew the line, that's where I'm gonna cut. Right on that line. Okay, now I want to press toward the dark, so I'm going to turn these over. Okay, why do we press toward the dark? Okay, in quilt making in general, we press toward the dark because if we didn't and we press toward the light, sometimes that dark fabric will cast a shadow along that seam, and we don't want that. Now you'll notice that when they were still in squares, I pressed them flat. I do that because pressing a seam flat means I'm setting those stitches. Setting a stitch simply means that sometimes when you're sewing, that stitching line, it helps those stitches sink down into the fabric, okay? It's called setting the seam. My half square triangles, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to do a little bit of trimming because I want to make sure, now is where I want to make sure this is 5.5 inches because it's now a square and I need it to fit inside. I need it to fit inside the block. So I need this to be 5.5 inches, and I'm matching up the 45-degree angle on my seam. Okay. Is that better? 5.5 inches, 5.5 inches. Okay, that looks good. Okay, let's do it again. Now that it's a square, okay, and it is a half square triangle, now we're going to trim it at 5.5 inches because we need that block to fit inside, this square to fit inside that block, okay? So that's pretty good. 5.5 inches, there we go. Five and a half inches. There we go. These are trimming up very well. There's my 45-degree angle. I'm lining up this 5.5 inches with this 5.5 inches, okay? Trim that. I'm gonna go like this. 2, 3, 4, 5. Trim this. That's good. Okay, 5.5. That's pretty good. Okay, now let's lay it out of the way. Here, 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 there, there. Let's put this here. Sort of like a puzzle, huh? Now, I could do it like that, or I could do it like this. Which way? Oh boy, I like both. I really do like both. Oh boy. You know what I think I'm gonna do? I'm gonna stitch these squares to the rectangles while I think about how I want the final layout. I think that's what I'm gonna do. I'm taking these pieces and I'm not stopping and cutting after each piece. I'm doing, some people call this chain piecing. I call it assembly line sewing because it's almost like an assembly line. You know, like in a factory. You're feeding one thing after another, but we'll call it chain piecing. When I started out in quilting, we call this assembly line sewing. And I'm just feeding the next one through. And I'm holding it down because this can wiggle down here. And then I'm not going all the way through. I'm leaving a little bit of excess fabric before that needle so that I can prep the next piece to go through. Okay. And now I'm getting ready. There we go. There we go. There we go, see? Trim these apart. Now, like I said earlier, we're going to do something called setting the seam. It just means you're pressing them flat, give them some heat, and that helps the threads sink down into the fabric. And now, I'm just going to press them open. Okay, oops, put a little curl in there. Okay, I've got 4 of these, and I have to figure out how I want my placement. And I do think I like this arrangement because these little flowers complement the red and the rose. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, here's row 1, row 2, row 3. I'm going to flip row 2 on top of row 1, and I'm going to feed this through my machine. Okay, I'm taking row 2 and flipping it onto row 1, and I'm going to feed this one through. We're chain piecing. And now we're taking row 2, flipping it to row 1, and we're going to chain piece. Now, here we go. Now at this point, we are not cutting the threads and we're not pressing yet, okay? I think what we'll do is we'll do a little bit of a finger press. There. Now we're going to flip row 3 onto row 2. So get it all lined up. Hold on to those threads. Okay, before I run that all the way through, I'm going to grab row 3 and put it on top of row 2 and line it up nice and straight. Okay, before I finish the row, I'm going to stop, open it up, and I know that this is row 3. It's going to get flipped onto row 2, okay? Okay, let's see what we got. There we go. I had a little pucker here. Little tiny pucker there. That's okay. Okay, I'm gonna seam press or do my fingernail press. Okay. And now we're gonna flip. And we have these little threads to hold everything in place, okay? Now, the one thing I am going to do, this seam is going to your right. I'm going to flip this one to go to your left. And that way, the seam nests and that seam will lay flat. If they're both going in the same direction, that creates bulk right there, okay? And we don't want bulk. So I'm just going to push that under seam in the opposite direction and put a little pin there to hold it in place. And that's called nesting seams when they go in the opposite direction, okay? So let's get this row stitched. Okay, there's that. Now we're going to flip it. We're going to do the same thing. Okay, only this time This one's going to your right, and this one on top is going to your left. Okay? This one's going to your right, and this one is going to your left. All right, let's see what it looks like. Ho-ho! Have some thread sticking out. I gotta trim those. Let me go press it. Let me get these threads out of here. Okay, now because I had to move those seams around, I'm gonna press a little bit from this side, okay? Just to make sure these seams are going in the right direction, okay? And I'm just pressing, and pressing means I'm going in the up and down motion, up, down, up, down. I'm not ironing and going like this. And the reason for that is if I iron this square could end up being a little lopsided. I'm just lifting, gently lifting. There we go, I'm lifting. Okay, let's go look at it. Let's put it up on the board. Well, here they are. Monkey wrench, made with squares, rectangles, and half square triangles. It's a wonderful block to use up scraps. And it's a great beginner block. It teaches you how to cut accurately squares and rectangles and how to create half square triangles. And depending on the layout, you can change the orientation of the color or the print to give you a different effect. So before we leave, I'm going to give you the exact measurements to create one of these blocks. Okay. The monkey wrench. The monkey wrench has 4 half square triangles. They're going to finish at 5 inches. So you need 2 colors cut at 6 inches, and you need 2 colors cut at 6 inches, okay? Because remember, when you put them right sides facing, and you draw your line down the middle diagonally and you stitch on either side of that line and then you cut it open, you get 2 half square triangle blocks, okay? So to make the half square triangles, you need a solid fabric, two squares cut at 6 inches, and a print fabric, 2 squares cut at 6 inches. And those will finish at 5 inches, okay? You need 5 squares cut at 2.5 inches that will finish at 2 inches, okay? So it's the 4 outer squares that are attached to the rectangle plus the square right in the middle. And you can choose your colors for those. You need 4 rectangles, each cut at 2.5 inches by 3 inches, and they will finish at 2 inches by 3 inches. And your block, once it's in a quilt, will finish at 12 inches. So it's just a fun beginner block. It teaches you some nice basic skills to build upon in your repertoire. So just remember, a regular square or rectangle, you need a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you have a square that's going to finish at 2 inches, you need to add a 1/2 inch, a 1/4 inch on both sides. If you're creating 1 half square triangle and you want it to finish at 5 inches, you're going to take 2 colors of fabric and you're going to cut them at 6 inches. Draw a line down the diagonal, stitch a 1/4 inch on each side of those lines, press, cut on that line, and then open it up. Press again, and then you're going to trim it at 5.5 inches. I hope you try the monkey wrench block. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, a like, and a share. I would appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Angela Davis, and I'm the Forum Quilter. And remember, why sleep when you can sew? Bye. Try to stay cool. Bye.